Welcome, everybody. We're going to give people another couple minutes to join, and then we'll go ahead and get started.
Yes. Debbie.
Looks like we still got people coming in, so we're only about half of our, 200 or so watermark, so we'll give people another couple minutes still, and then we'll jump in. All right, I think let's go ahead and get started today. Welcome everyone to our May Pathways Initiative stakeholder meeting. We are excited about our agenda today, finalizing our first step one here in this process. And so I think we can go ahead and jump in. My name is Kathleen Stacks. I'm the Executive Director of Western Freedom and co-chair of the Westwide Governance Pathways Initiative, along with Pam Sporborg, who I will let introduce herself as well. Pam?
Good morning, I'm Pam Sporborg with Portland General Electric and the co-chair with Kathleen of the Pathways Initiative.
And we are thrilled to have everybody. We are, I think the last time we were together, walked through the straw proposal that we presented back in April. We received a lot of really good stakeholder input through all of that. All of those comments are posted on the Pathways Initiative landing page on the WEEB website. So if you have not had a chance to see all of those comments, they are all posted there. Today, we are going to walk through, present our final recommendation for step 1 of the Pathways Initiative. We'll take some public comment on that, and then we're going to take a public vote. As part of our charter, our charter says that we will make all final decisions in a public meeting. And so we wanted to take the opportunity to do that today. And then we're going to walk through sort of our phase 2 work and timeline, provide an update on our budget and our fundraising thus far. And then we will provide an additional opportunity for public comment on more generally, and then talk about our next stakeholder meeting. So yeah, so with that, we can go ahead and go to the next slide. And I'll pass it over to Evie Call to walk through, just provide an overview of the step 1 final proposal and the feedback that we received from stakeholders. So Evie, I'll pass it to you.
Thank you, Kathleen. I'm Evie Call from California Community Choice Association, and I am co-chair of the Priority Functions and Scope Working Group within the Launch Committee. Before we dive into step 1, first, I know a lot of you have heard this before, so bear with us. I think it's really important we get through this today before we take our vote in a fulsome manner. So we're going to walk through in detail. And before we get to step 1, let's start by talking about the stepwise approach and revisiting that briefly so you have that in your head. So we started out in December thinking that we would choose one path forward. We had a bunch of options that we set out in December, and we were going to look at choosing one of those. Based on the comments in January and some further discussions within the launch committee, it seemed prudent for us to start heading down an incremental approach. So it was that thinking that brought us to what we're calling the stepwise approach, with basically within the Pathways group, 2 steps looking toward a 3rd step beyond Pathways. So step 1 increases the WEIM governing body's authority over existing energy markets. In other words, we're staying within the CAISO envelope with the markets as they are today. But we're taking the governing body's authority from joint authority to primary authority, and we'll talk about that a little bit more. Step 2, which Spencer will talk about, goes a little bit further than that. And what it does that's critical here is it creates a new independent regional organization to govern energy markets. So we will do some kind of transfer of authority from the CAISO over energy markets to this new regional organization. Step 3, as I said, is beyond the scope of Pathways right now, but it's something we've given attention to. And step 3 would continue to expand the scope of the regionalized functions and services that the RO would offer. And again, we've given this a good deal of thought as well, because we don't want to adopt a step 2 approach that won't enable a pathway, if you will, to step 3 ultimately, and perhaps onto a regional transmission organization. So that's the stepwise approach. Next slide. So the goal of step 1 was to increase independence and authority of the governing body within the existing structure. And really important part of that was making sure that we did it in a way that stayed within the bounds of existing California law. So our opinion from Perkins Coie, and along with our own analysis, we've come to the conclusion that what we're proposing here is within the scope of existing California law. So today, the WEIM governing body is a chartered body. It's not a formal organization like the CAISO. It's not a corporation. But this governing body shares joint authority with the CAISO board of governors in making market decisions. That's what's in place today, joint authority between the 2 of them over that scope. The scope of issues that's included in that joint authority is determined by the applies to test. In other words, if a tariff provision applies to WEIM participating entities in their role as WEIM entities, then it is subsumed within the joint authority group of tariffs. Everything else is basically in the CAISO's sole authority. So what we're doing is taking the existing joint authority today and elevating that to primary authority. We're maintaining the applies to test, so the scope of tariffs that are affected is the same as it is today under joint authority. We're not expanding the scope of authority, but we're elevating up to primary authority. So what does that really mean? Next slide. Oops, did we miss one? There, thank you. So what I'll do is walk through the step one decision-making process. So how is a tariff change made? And in that process, I'll highlight the key differences between what happens today and what would happen under step one. So, and I think just in general, if you look at this, everything that's in blue is what happens today. Things that are in green are different from what happens today. So the first step is the stakeholder process. There's no change in that. There will be some changes in step two, but not in step one. So it's the existing CAISO stakeholder process. What is different is today, the proposal from the stakeholder process would go to both the Board of Governors and the WEIM governing body to make a decision to advance the proposal. In this case, we're putting the governing body in the first position of making that decision. So the proposal goes to the governing body, and the WEIM governing body makes a decision whether to advance that proposal, modify that proposal, or whatever happens from the stakeholder process. From that point where the WEIM governing body has said, okay, here's a proposal we want to advance, then it goes to the CAISO. And the CAISO can place it on its consent calendar, in which it goes straight through and gets filed by the CAISO with FERC. It can, the CAISO can say, I'm not going to move this on my consent calendar. We have some things to discuss, in which case the process will go into the existing dispute resolution procedures under the WEIM charter. So there's no change in those dispute resolution provisions. And to the extent that those dispute resolution procedures result in agreement, then again, that agreement moves on to FERC for decision. What's key and different in our proposal is what happens if they can't resolve the difference of opinion in the dispute resolution process. So effectively, what we're doing is narrowing the approach and the circumstances under which the CAISO can unilaterally file tariff changes. So really the only time that they will be able to file tariff changes unilaterally will be in time critical exigent circumstances. That's a narrow scope of authority. In all other circumstances, if they can't reach agreement, FERC ends up being the final arbiter. And what's key and different here is that the CAISO will be bound to use its Section 205 filing rights to file not only the proposal that it has coming out of dispute resolution, but on a co-equal basis to file the governing body's proposal. So both proposals will go to FERC to decide the question, and there will be no preference given to one or the other. And that's what we're calling the dual filing or jump ball procedure. This is a really material change over what's happening today, and I think this is what's moving a number of people toward this proposal, because today the governing body only really has the right to file a statement of opinion along with a CAISO filing when there's that disagreement. So collectively, the changes in this process are what elevate the governing body's authority from joint to primary. Another important aspect of the proposal is the trigger, and we got quite a few comments on the trigger, and it can be confusing. So the goal of step one is to expand the EDAM footprint. And to ensure that step one actually produces that result, the footprint is required to meet certain thresholds before we can actually put the new rules into effect. So we have to actually see expansion of the EDAM footprint. And I'll just read it to you. I mean, the trigger occurs when a set of geographically diverse, non-CAISO WEIM entities equal to or greater than 70% of the CAISO BAA load, and we're tagging that to 2022, when 70% sign an implementation agreement, it triggers the implementation of these new governance rules. Effectively what that does, and you've probably seen announcements by a number of parties throughout the first part of this year about joining EIM. If all of those come through and we get one more Southwest balancing authority to join, like NV Energy, it will trigger implementation of the new governance rules. So the CAISO process is going to take this proposal today. I think Kathleen will explain that a little bit more through their stakeholder process. And Stacy Crowley is here to talk about that too. But I want to highlight one additional aspect of Step 1 proposal that adds values for consumers. Today, the WEIM charter, if you look at it, has a few provisions addressing what could be called the public interest. The Step 1 proposal augments its responsibility to take the public interest, and that's consumer costs and state and local policies, into account in making its decisions.
Tessa Hansen.
The Step 1 model also retains the existing advisory role of the body of state regulators. So in the diagram, you see all of the gray boxes where the BOSR will be providing input into the decision-making process. So that's not changing as well. So this is an important part of it. We're going to be developing this further in Step 2, but there is a great deal of focus on the public interest. With that, I will pass this off for discussion to David Rubin, who has been a key player. Oh, sorry, I've got to cover the integration. So we wanted to talk through what we did with the comments we received on Step 1. And there were, I would say most of the comments were in the nature of requesting clarification, but there were a couple of substantive changes, I guess. The first one is there are a number of statements in here about respecting state policies. We've expanded that now to be that the WEIM governing body will respect state and local policies. And you might be aware that we've got a lot of government organizations within the group of LSEs and balancing authorities. So this takes their policies into account as well. We also discussed a reverse trigger. In other words, if all these folks sign their implementation agreements and we go and we implement the new governance rules, what happens if they drop out and we fall below that trigger threshold? So there was a lot of discussion about that issue, and where we ultimately landed is that there are provisions currently in the WEIM charter that allow revisitation of governance rules in that event. So if there's an erosion of the market, there can be reconsideration of those governance rules. And finally, there were a number of areas of clarification, the dual filing jump ball process, the trigger, got a lot of comment, the meaning of exigent circumstances, which we went into pretty good detail, I think, in our revision to explain that, the role of the body of state regulators, the applies to test, and the dispute resolution process. So we enhanced the discussion of all of these issues within our final proposal and hope that that responded to your questions. And if not, obviously, we're happy to answer more questions. Okay, now I can pass it off to Dave Rubin of NV Energy. And he's been a key player in the formulation of Step 1 and has some news for you, I believe.
Thanks, Evie.
And as Evie just indicated, the triggering mechanism here is execution of the implementation agreement. And I think right now Pacific Corp is the only one, or the only entity that's formally executed it. A number of others, LA Bank, Portland General, and Idaho have either expressed their intention of doing so, or at least leaning in that direction. And there certainly have been press reports about NV Energy in that regard as well. We are making our integrated resource planning filing this afternoon, although I don't expect it to be available on the UCN's website until sometime next week, given the volume and size of what's going in. And as has been reported, that filing will indicate NV Energy's intention to request authorization from our commission later this year to join EDAN. And so the Nevada process is a bit different than some of the others. We need formal authorization from our commission to move forward, and we do anticipate bringing this recommendation to them in a filing, hopefully in the fall of this year. So that's where we are in the process. I don't expect, as I said, the formal filing to be up on the website until sometime next week. Thanks, Evie.
Back to you, Kathleen.
Thanks, David. Thanks, Evie. And with that, we wanted to give Stacy Crowley from the CAISO an opportunity to kind of talk about what their process is going to be after the launch committee takes a formal vote today. We will be submitting our final recommendation to the CAISO for their consideration and their process. So we wanted to make sure we took an opportunity to explain what that's going to look like as well. So with that, I'll pass it over to Stacy.
Thanks, Kathleen. Just a sound check. You hear me?
We sure can.
Okay, thank you. Yep, thanks for inviting me just to say a couple words. And I know you and Evie touched on this a little bit, but we actually had an opportunity to hear from the launch committee last week. The board and the governing body heard from members of the launch committee at a public session on May 22nd. Thank you for coming in and talking to them. And in that discussion, both of the chairs, Chair Jan Shorey of the board and Chair Andrew Campbell from the governing body, talked a little bit about the process that we would see moving forward. And I'll just lay that out here for you all, knowing that there's probably going to be a little wiggle room, just depending on the timing of stakeholder calls and comment periods. But as Kathleen said, the launch committee will submit their final proposal on step one to both the chairs of the board and the governing body. And then those two chairs are likely to, sort of accept that proposal, acknowledge that proposal, and ask the ISO staff and management to run a public stakeholder process, similar to what we do on other initiatives. That will include the posting of that proposal onto our website, and the launch will include the posting of a meeting notice to have a stakeholder call to go over that proposal. The launch committee will be a part of that process, I think, all the way through. They will help present the proposal, and then we will hold what will be a 3-week comment period. Again, we'll plus or minus a couple days depending on the posting dates, et cetera, and really make sure that we are doing our best to make sure that all of our stakeholders are engaged and reading that proposal and able to engage in the process. We would then allow some time for a potential response period if comments came back from our stakeholder process that the launch committee needed to consider. So again, that depending on the types of responses that come back, we will play that by ear, but we certainly don't want to rush that process. Then once there is a proposal that we believe can be brought to both the boards, we will notice a special public meeting that will likely be late July or sometime in August. And there, both the governing body and the board will take a vote on that proposal. So as I said, the launch committee will be involved all the way through because it is, you know, it's their proposal coming to us. And we want to make sure that those questions and the specifics get answered by those who developed it. We want to find ways, as I said, to make sure that there's robust stakeholder engagement from all stakeholders that have interest. So, you know, again, all that you have done to do your outreach amongst your sectors has been very helpful in your process. We would love to see that for our process, and we'll also do our outreach to stakeholders that typically engage in our processes. Just a note that what the board and the governing body would be approving is the proposal itself, and we recognize that the formal governance documents, revisions, and tariff changes associated with the proposal would be drafted and brought for decision at a later date, closer to the trigger that Evie mentioned would be met. I'm happy to take any questions or just pass it on.
Thanks so much, Stacy. I'll ask you to stick around just for a couple of minutes because we're going to move into public comment at this point, and happy to take any questions related to step one before the launch committee takes an official vote on the final proposal. Jessica.
Hi, good morning. Thanks, Kathleen. Thanks, Stacy. This question is for Stacy. Jessica Zano, Puget Sound Energy. So, Stacy, I'm just curious that that first, if we could go back a slide. Thank you. Yeah, that public meeting for joint decision on step one proposal. Does that joint decision of those two bodies include an acceptance of the changes to the WEAM charter? Or just the concept, just the proposal concept?
Thank you. Yes, it would be just the proposal concept, and then there would be an opportunity we would draft the governance document changes. That would be the bylaws, the EIM charter, et cetera, and likely tariff changes due to that dual filing role. And that would be done at a later date, and that would be posted and seen for the public to view before the decision.
Great, thank you. Very helpful.
Thanks, Jessica. Joe.
Yeah, hi. This is Joe Fina. I'm with the Snohomish County PD in Washington State, and I wanted to ask you about the dual filing at FERC. I've been just thinking through how this would work. If the CAISO will submit both of the proposals and not express a preference, then who do you envision being the proponent? The party advocating that either filing meets the just and reasonable standard at FERC.
My sense would be that we would have both bodies advocating at FERC on their proposals, rather than having the CAISO advocate for the governing body's position.
I see. Okay, so when you say CAISO in the proposal, that's referring to kind of Elliott and his staff, and not necessarily the Board of Governors.
Yes. So basically, the CAISO files it after it's approved by the board and files both proposals. They go to FERC co-equally, and I would expect, again, both bodies or both the CAISO in whatever form and the governing body to advocate their positions.
Okay. All right, thanks.
Jessica, I'm assuming you get your question answered.
Sorry about that. Yeah, I'll put my hand down.
Okay. Good. Any other questions, comments on step one? All right, excellent. And I did want to just take a moment to thank everyone for providing input through this last comment period. I think it was really helpful for us to know where we needed some additional information, some additional clarification, and then to know to hear such broad support for this step one proposal. So thank you all for taking the time to submit those comments. Thanks to everyone on the launch committee for all the work that went into developing this, and actually, and thanks also to the CAISO for providing feedback and input on the technical side as we've worked through this as well. So we're excited that we've gotten to this point, and I think with that we can move into we're going to do a roll call vote, and the language sort of resolution, if you will, that we're going to be voting on is as follows. Number one, support the West-wide Governance Pathways Initiative Step 1 proposal to advance it to the California Independent System Operator for further public process and implementation. And number two, support advancing the Step 2 proposal for further development by the Launch Committee. So this is the language that we are voting on today. Our charter enables proxy vote for those who were of the launch committee who were unable to attend. And so we have a couple of those that we've heard from of our launch committee members. And then also just to note, we have sort of a voting, the voting members of the launch committee. We have non-voting members of the launch committee that are our state and federal representatives. And then we also have alternates for several of our sectors who are not formal voting members, but we will check in for expressions of support for those as well. So I'm going to start with a roll call of our voting members for the launch committee. If you can come off mute and say and register your vote, that would be great. So we'll start with our California investor-owned utility transmission owners. Scott Renzel from Pacific Gas and Electric.
I support.
Thank you, Scott. Jeff Nelson from Southern Cal Edison.
I support.
All right, moving to the EIM entities. Amaya Ahmad from Arizona Public Service.
I support.
David Rubin from NV Energy.
I support.
Kirstine Rock from Pacific Corp.
I support.
Pam Sporboard from Portland General Electric.
I support.
All right, our public power and co-ops. Josh Walter from Seattle City Light.
I support.
Connor Wrighton is out, and I think we have a proxy from PNGC Power.
Yep, Jeff Google from PNGC. We support. Thank you.
Jeff. Jim Shetler was unable to make it today, but submitted his support via email. And so did Randy Howard from Northern California Power Agency. So we have support from both of them via email. Moving to the independent power producers and their trade associations, Scott Miller from the Western Power Trading Forum.
I support.
Jan Smutney Jones from the Independent Energy Producers Association.
We support.
Lisa Torman Hickey from Interwest Energy Alliance.
We support.
Moving to the residential and small commercial customers, Michelle Beck from the Utah Office of Consumer Services.
I support.
Large commercial and industrial customers and their trade associations, Kathleen Stacks from Western Freedom. I support. Technology providers and their trade associations, Brian Turner from Advanced Energy United.
We support. Thanks.
Our non-utility load serving entities and their trade associations, Evie Call from the California Community Choice Association.
We support.
Labor, Mark Joseph from the Coalition of California Utility Employees and the State Association of Electrical Workers.
I support.
And last but not least, our public interest organizations, Michael Colvin from the Environmental Defense Fund.
I support.
Elaine Ginocchio representing Western Resource Advocates.
I support.
And Ben Otto from the Northwest Energy Coalition.
I support.
Thank you all voting members. In addition to our voting members, I'll check in with our alternates. So if you are on the call and would like to just express support, Rob Eckenrod from Pacific Corp. John Olson from SMUD.
I support.
Spencer Gray from NIPSI. Spencer better support. All right, I'm going to track Spencer down. Heidi Rotz from the Clean Energy Buyers Alliance.
I support.
And Mark Specht from the Union of Concerned Scientists.
I support.
Fantastic. Thank you all for your vote, for your support. And now I want to take a moment. I know we have a couple of our non-voting members who have expressed willingness to make some supportive comments as well. So I'll start with those who I know have expressed that, and then happy to open up to others from our state and federal partners. And I'm going to start with Crystal Dean from the Western Area Power Administration.
Hey, good morning. Thanks, Kathleen and everyone. I guess maybe because I'm a non-voting member, I'm going to get to take a little bit more mic time, so apologies in advance. But did just want to thank you, Kathleen, and the launch committee for giving us non-voting members the opportunity to provide comments of support. As many of you all know, WAPA is a marketing footprint that spans 15 states across the central and western U.S., which really emphasizes our need to continue to engage and understand the different things going on across the West and key market development items that we're talking about here. So this really ensures and recognizes WAPA's customer interests and perspectives and voices are being heard. Because WAPA is a federal agency, we are limited by federal applicable law, and therefore our continued participation will be limited. However, we are committed to continuing to support our mission and the needs of our customers and market decision processes through continued engagements and initiatives such as Pathways. So thanks for a few minutes of extra airtime, and just wanted to provide that, and thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Crystal. And with that, I'll go to Letha Tani from the Oregon Commission.
Thanks so much. Let me start by really thanking the launch committee for taking up the concept that the regulators had put forward last summer, fleshing it out and producing such an astonishing work product. It's also enormously heartening to see the roll call of sectors and the breadth of expertise that has engaged so fully in this conversation inside California and outside California. Just a great regional showing, and also breadth of perspectives coming into the conversation. So just really appreciate folks taking on such a large body of work outside their day jobs. And having participated in the governance review committee process, really want to appreciate the depth and thoughtfulness of this proposal, and excited to see it go into the CAISO stakeholdering process. I think it really gives them a lot to work with, and I look forward to seeing the continued evolution that this promises for regional cooperation and truly regional oversight of key decisions. So thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Tani. Commissioner Kevin Thompson from the Arizona Corporation Commission.
Thank you, Kathleen. I would like to first commend the stakeholders for moving us to this direction. There was a lot of pressure on you guys, I think, from the get-go. And when we met in person here in beautiful Phoenix, Arizona. There was some tension there in the room a little bit here and there, but to see where the stakeholders have moved the conversation, to get us toward independent governance and giving primary authority to WEIM as the governing board is a step in the right direction that gets us away from the joint authority and starts moving us really closer towards independent governance. So kudos to the stakeholders and the long conversations that you've had, and I look forward to seeing what's next. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Commissioner Thompson. Any of our other state representatives and non-voting members want to jump in?
Hey, Kathleen, this is Milt from Washington, if I could.
Yeah, please.
Also, Milt Dumit, Washington Commission, fully supportive, 100%. And I too just wanted to echo my colleagues in thanks to the launch committee for all the hard work that has occurred to date, and based on the track record of the launch committee, the hard work that I know will continue as we discuss step 2. So fully supportive. Thank you.
Thanks, Commissioner Dumit. Commissioner Houck.
Just wanted to echo the comments of my colleagues in the other states and thank the launch committee for the tremendous amount of work on this, and I'm looking forward to steps in this process. So thank you to everyone. Truly historic effort.
Thanks, Commissioner Houck. Anyone else? All right, fantastic. Well, this is we're thrilled to be able to move forward with step 1 and start to engage with the CAISO in a different way on this particular piece. And we can move on to step 2 and talk about sort of our next steps. Jessica.
Kathleen, I'm sorry, I wasn't clear. Is it open for comment from anyone at this point, or are we just asking for commissioners?
We were just asking for commissioners for step 1 because we had the public comment opportunity for that. We're going to have another public comment opportunity at the end for additional questions, comments.
Okay, great. Thank you. No problem.
Yeah, thanks. All right. Thank you, Commissioner O'Connell. Appreciate your note. All right, with that, I'm going to pass it over to Spencer Gray, hopefully, to talk about phase 2 and our work plan moving forward over the next few months. Spencer? Do we not have Spencer?
Kathleen, can you hear me now?
Yes. Hi, Spencer. Welcome.
Okay. Hello. Well, I'm having some audio problems, but I will go off the video here. I'm Spencer Gray from NIPSI, the Northwestern Independent Power Producers Coalition, and I'm the co-chair with Evie Call of the Functions and Scope Work Group. What I'm going to cover today are the next steps on step 2, now that we've taken the vote on step 1. I'm not planning to get into the content on step 2 as laid out in the straw proposal, although we're happy to take some questions on some of the open issues in the straw proposal, but this is more of a description of our work plan. Since we received over 30 public comments on the straw proposal a few weeks ago, we've really focused our attention on refining step 1 to get it ready for the vote today, given the breadth of support from stakeholders for moving forward. And what we've done on step 2 is come up with a work plan internally with more opportunities for external participation too for those outside of the launch committee. So we're moving into phase 2 of our work now, which is focused on refining the step 2 proposal as laid out in the straw proposal in the coming 6 months or so. There are a bunch of open questions in the straw proposal. They're really noted throughout the proposal And so our goal is to try to answer for our own satisfaction on the launch committee and engaging with many folks on this call, what the best move forward for step 2 is. We've created a number of work streams within the launch committee, so we wanted to share a bit who's on point for answering some of those questions and gathering external feedback and input into a final recommendation. What we'll do toward the end of June is give an update on the status of the straw proposal for step 2. We're going to give ourselves a little bit of breathing room to sort out how many of the open issues we're able to address by then, and give an update on some of these work streams as well. There will not be a full revised or new proposal for stakeholders to read at the end of June. What we're aiming for is by the fall, and really we've worked backward from how much time would be required to pull together draft legislation in California for the folks who would be working on that. The launch committee itself is not going to be drafting legislation. That's not our prerogative. But we've worked backwards from the timeline of the session next year in California to try to land a final recommendation for step 2 by this fall. So in the September to October timeframe. That proposal would be another written product with a chance for public comment on it as well, just as we had for the straw proposal last month. A number of the topics that we're going to be addressing internally will include some public workshops that will be virtual, not in person. We're still working on dates and specific topics for those over the course of the summer, and those will be open to all stakeholders. And I want to spotlight one particular set of issues around what the stakeholder process would look like for the new regional organization. This particular topic and work stream is going to be addressed through a more independently facilitated process with a goal of structuring more opportunities for stakeholder participation. I would observe that if there was one consistent comment from stakeholders into the launch committee this past month, it was a real desire to roll sleeves up and engage on what the various elements of stakeholdering new initiatives and policies under the regional organization would look like. And so we've heard that loud and clear, and I want to turn to Kathleen for a moment to
Hey, good morning, Jesse.
Explain that a little bit more.
Good.
Thanks, Spencer. Yeah, we're excited about this particular work stream, and I think there's going to be a lot of opportunities for really broad input into this. So we're actually going to be working with GridWorks is going to help us do the independent facilitation. As part of that, we're going to be looking at the way other stakeholder processes are structured in other RTOs and ISOs and sort of market-related entities across the country. We're going to be taking input on, the processes that this group in particular knows well, both through the CAISO and through SPP and through the RAP program with the Western Power Pool, and really building on the experiences and input there. This is also a forum where we're going to be ensuring that we incorporate our consumer advocate priorities and input as well. So really building on a lot of the work that we already know, and trying to make sure that we can come up with something that really accommodates an efficient and open process, and takes the pieces that are tried and true and build from there. So this is something we're kicking off here pretty quickly. But we'll have a lot of extra opportunities for stakeholders. So please do look for those opportunities. I think we'll probably be getting back to everybody in the next couple of weeks with some additional information about workshops and stakeholder engagement. So yeah, we're excited to really dig into this piece. I think this is going to be something that is important to supporting the level of independence that we're going to be hopefully moving towards with the regional organization. So thanks, Spencer.
Yeah, thanks, Kathleen, for heading up that work too.
Yeah.
As Kathleen described, that work stream, which is at the top here of this list, is really focused on some of the small G lived experience day to day of participants and stakeholders in energy markets and RTOs. And it's not something that the launch committees spent our time on much to date. We've really focused on what we've talked about as sort of big G governance, Section 205 rights, and the structure of a new corporation. But in our view, there's an equal importance on that set of issues that Kathleen just described. So on this list of work streams, you'll see the leads within the launch committee itself, who are working through with a number of our colleagues on the launch committee some of these issues in small groups, and then feeding back new data and recommendations to the broader committee to inform a refinement of the step 2 proposal. What I want to highlight is that what we shared last month in the straw proposal and in our public meeting at the last one is really as far as we felt we could get with our goal of putting a straw proposal out this spring on a step 2 recommendation. We really have not gone further than what is in the straw proposal. So all of the open issues that are highlighted remain open issues. This is an opportunity over the coming 3 or 4 months, at least in my view, for stakeholders really to engage and try to help us shape the direction of step 2. The core tension that we identified between options 2 and 2.5, as they're labeled in the straw proposal, remains a tension between the degree of institutional independence of the regional organization and the financial liability and responsibility that comes along with institutional independence. So the question in front of us has not been, is sole authority over the Section 205 filing rights, is there a difference there between the two options in step 2? That's really not been in question. What we're trying to wrestle with is, what is the incremental value to stakeholders and to launch committee members of having the institutional independence that comes along with potentially some of those higher costs that the straw proposal highlights. So that's really the core issue in front of us. It's the form of contract between the regional organization and the CAISO going forward in step 2 and some of those associated costs. So on this list of work streams under the CAISO issues, there are a couple examples there of what this work stream will tackle. This is really focused on some of those core tensions I just described in the structure of the contract between the two corporations. Evie touched on the apply to test in step 1, and we have a ongoing effort that we've described in previous public meetings to look through the existing tariff subsections of the CAISO to figure out where are the balancing authority functions, and under sole authority in step 2, what does the world look like for retaining those functions under the CAISO's corporate responsibilities as opposed to transferring them over to the RO. The public interest issues there, the core question is really about the evolution of the BOSSer under the regional organization. Carl Linville's been a lead liaison for the state regulators in that sense. On the RO formation work stream, we highlighted this in our last meeting. We're still unsure about the form of incorporation, what kind of nonprofit corporation we'd expect the RO to be. So that group will tackle that question. And then finally, how does the RO itself, how is it governed itself? What is the nomination process for nominating a board for the regional organization? What is the funding source for the regional organization compared to the governing body today? So that set of issues as well. So I think that captures the broad work streams that we'll be moving forward with this summer to try to refine step 2. And Kathleen, I think I can hand it back to you now.
Thanks, Spencer. And with that, we wanted to also take a moment to provide a budget update to everyone about the funding that we've raised, our projected funding for our work in phase 2 and phase 3. And so I'm going to pass it over to Lisa to walk us through those numbers. Lisa?
Thank you, Kathleen. Lisa Torman Hickey, representing the Interwest Energy Alliance in serving on the launch committee. I also serve as co-chair of the Priority Administration subgroup of the launch committee with Jim Shetler of Bank. It's our job to keep the trains running. And so I wanted to run through a little of what our funding projections are, what our budget is, and how that matches with our scope of work going forward in phase 2 and 3. So we assume going into phase 2 that phase 1 has been completed with the delivery of step 1 final proposal to CAISO, and the work plan being developed as described by Spencer with anticipated completion before July 1st. So we are on our way to meet that goal. Then we know that additional funding will be needed for phase 2 and phase 3. Phase 2 will be the work that we complete by fall of this year to finalize the step 2 proposal. And phase 3 is as described by Spencer 2 and others. We'll start this fall and continue through next year to develop the regional organization, and we anticipate completion by first quarter of 2026. Next slide, please. So phase 2, to provide a little more detail, we may need additional legal review about step 2.0 or 2.5. We want to importantly develop cost estimates, which are critical to the decision-making between step 2 and step 2.5, as described by Spencer. We want to propose a robust stakeholder process, which will include the role of the states committee, and we will use consultants to assist us with that process. So then we'll make final recommendations for step 2, including that stakeholder engagement proposal. We'll publish that and gather input from all of you as stakeholders. Anyone who has an interest will be able to comment on that. We will review that comment. So that's what we'll do in phase 2. How we will do it is as follows. We'll continue with Utilicast for project management. Sarah Davis has been very helpful in that regard, as well as others. We'll continue by using Global Impact to give us that umbrella nonprofit 501c3 status. And we estimate the cost of phase 2 to be about $450,000 with some contingency built in there. Those are estimates, and these are really living numbers because it's just our best proposal that we could make based on what we know so far and our experience of what we can contribute from our own internal expertise and what we need to rely on third parties for and how much time we can commit. Next slide, please. Then we move to phase 3 to implement the step 2 recommendation. And that, as we noted, will start later this fall and continue through the first quarter of 2026. So we will establish a formation committee, which we anticipate at this point to be a subset of the launch committee and the WEAM governing body. The launch committee will continue overall to support this process. In conjunction with CAISO, we'll develop tariff amendments, bylaws, a nominating committee process, and details of that stakeholder process. We will rely on outside counsel to the extent we need it and are able to do so. We'll retain a placement firm to assist in board selection and potentially for selection of a management team for the regional organization. We'll create a nominating committee for board selection. We will monitor all the while what's happening with California legislation potentially and activities of the CAISO to approve and implement step 1. We'll continue with Utilicast project management support, which will be reduced over time as we are less active as a launch committee ourselves. We'll continue to use the Global Impact financial sponsorship. And we estimate the cost of phase 3 to be in the range of $636,000, including a contingency. Again, these are just estimates and we'll review as we go. And you can see the breakdown between these costs in the pie chart there. So then we expect the launch committee job will be ended with the end of next year. And as we start 2026 with a regional organization having been formed and positions seated as we described. So with that, I'll hand it back over to Kathleen.
Thanks, Lisa. And I think with that, we are ready to take additional questions or comments. So happy to open it up. Lauren.
Thanks. Good morning, Dennis from the Public Power Council. You alluded to the process for legislative pain, those changes is of course outside of what the launch committee is working on. And as mentioned, the scope of phase 3 will be including some monitoring of that. Could you all talk in a little bit more detail how those parallel work streams will inform one another? Are you going to, if I've understood correctly, at the end of, and pardon me, there's a lot of steps and phases, so if I name something the wrong thing, please excuse, but if I've understood correctly, the launch committee will approve a scope and a plan for the development of the RO at the end of step 2. Then move forward with that phase 3 of implementation. The scope that had been approved would be done before legislative change would have been pursued or developed. How does that feedback loop work? And I hope that question makes sense.
Okay, there was a little bit of echo, or a lot bit of echo actually. So if I get the question wrong, chime back in. But I think the question was essentially, how is the work for the launch committee over this next phase going to feed into and then work in parallel to the legislative process in California? Is that correct?
Yes. And are you having to make some assumptions about what that legislative change looks like in your approval of step 2?
And I'm happy to defer to some others on this as well, but I think the way we have been talking about it is that the development of our step 2 proposal over the coming months is what will inform the bill language that we would need to see to effectuate the sort of step 2 final proposal. So members of sort of from California have had some ongoing conversations with some legislators in California. So making sure that that we're working along with them as we move through the process, and so that they kind of know where we're going. So as we're developing what this step 2 proposal will look like, that will inform what changes need to happen at the legislature for next year. So, we have to operate under the assumption that we can get a bill passed, but what that bill language needs to be and what changes need to happen will depend on sort of where we land on the structure of step 2. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, that's helpful. Thanks.
You bet. Anybody else from the California side of things want to jump in on this as well? All right, great. Bill. Bill, if you're asking a question, you're still on mute.
Sorry, Bill Julian, a member of the public. I wanted to maybe formulate that question a little bit differently. Has any consideration been given to taking some time for lessons learned through step one before attempting to move to step two? Or is the seamless transition from step one to step two really an indication that step one is kind of kabuki theater? Related to that, has any consideration been given to expanding the retail consumer participation and perspective on the launch committee in the transition from step one to step two? I note that one of the primary consumer representatives in the original launch committee was Matt Baker, who now has changed roles. And it seems that the launch committee's membership is particularly lacking in representation from retail California consumers who are going to be the primary group impacted by this transition. So 2 questions: consideration for a pause for lessons learned from step one. Number 2, consideration given to expanding consumer representation on the launch committee.
Thanks, Bill. And maybe Michelle, if you're still on, maybe I'll let you sort of weigh in with your engagement with the residential consumer advocate sector. If you want to sort of provide some context there.
Sure, Kathleen. This is Michelle Beck, and I'm the director of the Utah Office of Consumer Services. We're the consumer advocate in Utah. But also, I wanted to make sure you knew that we do have monthly meetings with the consumer advocates from all of the states in the West, including California. Now, and the Cal advocates are invited back onto this, but I think that they're just going through some transition right now. So I know I'm hopeful, and I know I saw somebody from that office on this call. So I'm hopeful that they'll be back. But in the meantime, we do behind the scenes coordination among the consumer advocates in the West.
And is that, if I may ask, is that governmental consumer advocates or representatives of non-governmental retail consumer advocates?
It's the state sanctioned consumer advocate office in each state. So mostly governmental, but for example, in Oregon, it is a nonprofit.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks, Michelle. And again, happy to let others jump in here. Evie, I don't know if you want to, I saw you popped up on my screen, so maybe I'm defer to you.
Yeah, I was just going to ask Michelle to comment on the GridWorks project they've been working on and the output there.
So yeah, we that project is complete, and GridWorks reached out to 4 of the consumer advocates in the West. It was I think done a little bit with the idea of trying to have 2 from conservative states and 2 from maybe I would say less conservative states. I don't want to mischaracterize anyone. It was led by GridWorks. They facilitated it and did most of the writing, although I would say it was with heavy participation from those of us who were part of that group. I mean, I think it was like monthly meetings for about 9 months, and those meetings would be, I think, 2 to 6 hours. So there was quite a bit of input on that. We came up with some principles that we think are sort of the fundamental guidelines. And since then, we've also created a cover letter for that publication, wherein additional consumer advocates from the West endorse those principles. Of course, we're acknowledging that it's not comprehensive. We're going to have nuance in the different states, but we do have sort of what I would say is broad support for those as fundamental underlying principles that we'd like to see pursued in the development of regional organizations.
Is that document available on the launch committee website or the WEAB website?
Well, it's on in the chat. Matthew Tisdale from GridWorks has put a link. It's on their website, and I will say that there was a joint consumer advocate comments, and we put an attachment that it just included our cover letter plus the document, and that is on the website, the Pathways website hosted by WEAB. And under the comments from the last from the straw proposal.
Thank you.
Thanks, Michelle. And Spencer, do you want to weigh in on Bill's first question?
Yeah, Bill, thanks for the question. As to your first question, the directive that the launch committee got from the group of state regulators last summer who initiated this this initiative was to come up with recommendations for an independently governed organization that would oversee energy markets in the West and services beyond energy markets. And so part of our evaluation of how do we get to that objective was to hire the law firm Perkins Coie that did our legal risk analysis of what both current federal and state law permit from a risk analysis perspective for independent governance. And our conclusion was that step one, as we just scoped and voted on this morning, was permissible under current state law, but in our view, it didn't get us all the way to that truly independent governance model. But it was as far as we could recommend that the CAISO go in advance of legislative consideration of changes. And so it's really an attempt to lean into governance. I think it's, my own view is it's a material, meaningful change in the independence of the governing body. But by the guiding lights that we received from the regulators last summer, it doesn't get all the way to that actual sole authority independence notion, which step two allows. So I guess in my view, it's a natural evolution toward that objective. And it demonstrates, if it is adopted by the CAISO and the governing body, an attempt to lean into a more independent regional organization structure that, of course, depends on legislation to fully allow in step two. So I hope that explains the thinking there.
What are you doing with that ball?
Yeah, I guess my question, that doesn't really answer my question, which is, are there lessons to be learned from step one or during step one that would inform a proposal for step two? Apparently you spent a fair amount of time talking about the negative trigger. A negative trigger after step two has been landed, in Evie's phrase, obviously involves a lot more turmoil than taking a moment to learn lessons and allow participants to learn lessons before moving forward with step two. So I'm just wondering what the reasoning is for this apparently seamless process rather than taking the pause for lessons learned from step one.
So Bill, there is a backdrop here that we're all aware of, which is the entities, the balancing authorities, utilities in the West are trying to make decisions right now, and they are faced with deciding whether to go with SPP Markets Plus or to wait and see what we do in step two, moving toward independent governance. So there's a part of this that requires us to move forward rather quickly to accommodate that decision making. If we waited until step one gets implemented, probably in 25, late 25, 26, and then got some experience, we'd be way out there. In the meantime, those who are interested in where we're going with step 2 probably would have already made a decision because we didn't really produce what the regulators asked for. So I think the timing is critical for decision-making for Western entities.
Well, in terms of what's going on around the West, the 28 timeframe for BPA's new rate structure proposal, for example, suggested there is some time to learn lessons. And since it is the California consumers who are facing the incredibly high rates and the impact on those rates of this kind of a transition is unknown, isn't it also important to learn lessons from this from step 1 before deciding what step 2 might look like, even if it's flawed, especially if it's potentially flawed?
Bill, I think that the last thing I'll mention is just that we're not proposing any changes to the market design of EDAM. So anything related to costs is not something that we're actually proposing to change in step 1. And we're evaluating what the costs will be for the implementation of step 2 as we move forward, which are sort of structural costs. This is a conversation about the governance of those market services, not the actual market service and market design. So those pieces are moving forward sort of as they would at this point in time. But we're happy to take this offline too if you want to continue a conversation, but I appreciate the input and questions. I think we have taken a pretty deliberately incremental path in the West, and this is reflective of that and those opportunities to continue to learn from these steps. So all of this is going to take time, and we will continue to look at the experiences that we're gaining as we keep moving forward. Michelle?
Kathleen, I just wanted to interject one more thing. And you can also find these comments on the WEEB website from the most recent set of comments, and that is that Cal Advocates did submit a very thoughtful set of comments with specific recommendations for our phase 2 work. So even though they are not currently participating in the launch committee, they are dialed in and weighing in on behalf of California ratepayers as well.
Thanks, Michelle. Any other questions or comments? Cameron.
Hello, good morning. This is Cameron Reed with Puget Sound Energy. I just have a question on, so the stakeholder process working group was mentioned as one being considered for a public process. Are there any leanings or indications on which other ones might be public? Because it seems, or at least it feels to me like the RO governance working group would benefit from a public process, especially considering it's going to be looking over the nomination process and the funding. And I think that would be something that would be useful to have stakeholders or public stakeholders commented on early rather than later.
Spencer, I don't know if you want to weigh in on this. I think that's we haven't fully listed it all out, but this is something I think you're absolutely right. These are topics that we really want to ensure that we've got a lot of public input into. And so over the next probably 2 weeks, we will be identifying which of these topics we're going to, like, basically how we're going to have the public input on each of these topics, whether that's workshops or comment periods. But I anticipate that there will be robust stakeholder input opportunities for each of these, especially those that, as you flagged, we'll need to have as much sort of public, as broad a set of perspectives and input as possible. So I don't have a specific answer for you yet, but I think that's but certainly we'll be following up with additional information and appreciate the input on that specific work stream.
Yeah, I'll just add, Kathleen, Cameron, thanks for the suggestion on that specific set of questions for RO governance. We are trying to figure out within the different work streams, what are the topics that seem most important to get public workshops and the kind of early input you're describing, and we're going to circle back about that. I would just underscore the launch committee is a volunteer committee. We're not housed in a separate institution. We're doing our best here to facilitate as much public input and transparency as we can, given that context, and appreciate that comes across a bit differently than if we were a public agency of some form that had the staff and normal resources to have that kind of process. But we'll be as responsive as we can.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Thank you.
Anyone else? Kathleen. Kathleen, I can't hear you if you're speaking.
Oh, double muted. So sorry. Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Excellent. Kathleen Colbert from Vistra. We're a large competitive power provider operating in the West. That would be a market participant, just for folks on the call's context. I want to echo that I really appreciate the work that the launch committee has done. Part of what I'm trying to work through, and my question, if there's any extra context to add to this, is what I've been trying to work through is, I feel like you've been in this ideation stage kind of for the last year. And so the proposal that has been released and what you've been presenting marks a very important milestone for step 2 to move it into more of like a practical, okay, now let's delve into actual use cases, scenarios, and refine some of the details to get at that question of what's the difference in cost and what's the actual value add of 2 versus 2.5. I recognize that's what the workshops are going to cover, but when you showed those work streams, there were lots of them. Can you give me context for if it's going to be packaged in like a single conversation, or if you're envisioning opt-ins to the different work streams? Does that make sense?
Yeah, Kathleen, we're going to try to be respectful of folks' time and not overschedule opportunities for input.
Okay.
I would note that your comments from Vista were very well received in terms of how specifically you raised some of the concrete implementation questions that we do need to get to. So there's just more to come on that, and I encourage folks who are keen to roll up your sleeves on various open issues to be in touch with us, so we're aware of where we should make sure we're touching base and given the right chances for input.
Yeah, no, that's helpful, Spencer.
Go ahead, Kathleen.
No, I was just going to say that is helpful. What I heard in that response is you're still working through the format of the workshops, but that it's going to include these different work streams, and we'll just wait for more information. But feel free to add more, Kathleen. Thank you.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. I think what we want to make sure we're doing is, to the extent there are some overlapping issues that some of these work streams are working on, there's going to be a lot of coordination amongst these work streams. They're all sort of underneath the umbrella of our functions and scoping work group. And so there will be a lot of coordination among the work streams. And then as we get to the opportunities for public workshops, to the extent that there are, that they are representative of work of multiple work streams, we'll be combining those kinds of things. So it won't necessarily just be, 87 different workshops to participate in over the summer. So we're, yeah, again, trying to be efficient with our time and with the stakeholders' time as well. Vijay.
Hello, Vijay Satyal, Western Resource Advocates. First of all, big kudos to all of you. Thank you for all your work. This is very helpful and reaching this milestone. On the slide that I don't remember whether it was you, Kathleen, or Spencer, the phase 2 work with all the different work streams. One suggestion I want to just offer is, I think you touched on it, maybe Kathleen, is some of these issues that you will be exploring part of these workshops, they are not 100% new. They have been tackled by other RTOs in the past or other issues. So it's not, you guys may have already thought about it, but I wonder if it would be useful to bring in, say, someone from the legal team of SPP or MISO to talk about how they had dealt with it. So for all the RTOs that at some point were formed, they dealt with similar issues. So it would be great to tap into existing expertise and existing structures and see how things are either working or how they dealt with it back in the day. So just an idea, and I can follow up through a lane more. I have a couple of specific ideas on specific stakeholder constructs, but thank you.
Thanks, Vijay. I think that you raise a really important point that we don't want to recreate, we don't want to reinvent the wheel. We don't want to tapping into the resources that exist and that we have already is going to be a really important part of this. And I think learning from other experiences across the country and tapping into the experiences that we have here in the West as well is imperative for the work that we're going to be doing here. So thank you.
Kathleen, I just add, Vijay, that exact thought is going to get embedded in some of the work of the stakeholder process. We've already identified that as a valuable research need. And you've probably noticed in the broader straw proposal, the launch committee has engaged in a lot of those research efforts with other RTOs across the country to try to draw some best lessons and examples of things that haven't worked in other RTOs. I've said this before in these public meetings, but we really have the advantage of doing this in 2024 with 25 years or more of examples of things that work and things that don't work. So that's to the West's advantage in some ways to draw from the best practices.
Any other questions, comments? All right. Well, with that, our next stakeholder meeting is going to be at the end of June, June 28th. We will provide updates at that point on sort of the work streams. I would look to, I'm anticipating that we'll have additional information to share between now and then, but certainly we'll be using that time to provide an update on the work that we're getting through with all of our work streams and our work groups. And so look forward to seeing you all again then. Any other comments from the launch committee? All right. Yes, Lisa. Oh, yes. Lisa, go. Sorry.
Just that we appreciate all of you very much, and we especially appreciate our funders to date. We are looking at a number of options for future funding, but we will be doing ongoing fundraising. So we very much appreciate your openness to that and anything anyone can contribute. We want diverse sources of funding. Thank you all very much.
Thanks, Lisa. That literally popped in my head and then popped right back out. So thanks for chiming back in. Last thing I will mention too, for any of you who are new to our stakeholder meetings, if you are not receiving updates at this point in time, please get on the website to look at the charter, find your sector, and reach out if you need to be added to some a distribution list so that you are getting more sector-specific updates and information. Really appreciate all of the time and questions and conversation today. We're excited to move forward, and we'll see you all in about a month. Thanks, everybody.